Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a tremendous pleasure for me to be here to be the moderate, well, let's say immoderate moderator of this evening's debate on innovation. This is a particular pleasure for a couple of reasons. One, this is a topic that The Economist takes very seriously. We do live, of course, in the age of ideas, in what we call the ideas economy. And for those of you that are interested, the signature event of the Economist conferences series, the Ideas Economy, Innovation, will take place in March in Berkeley, where we'll have a spectacular lineup of speakers provoking these very themes that you're going to get a taste of in this debate. Our staff outside will have more information if you wanted to follow us or go to our website, ideas.economist.com. I'm delighted to co-chair that with Daniel Franklin, our chairman for this event here today. And secondly, I do have a book coming out on this very topic, the future of global innovation, Need, Speed, and Greed, which will be available at very good bookstores all over the place, including the corner bookstore around the corner being put out of business by the internet. So watch for that. So this is an issue that I've followed closely. And one thing I wanted to say before I bring up our distinguished debaters is innovation, a topic that is probably the most abused term in the English language. Am I right? How often have you seen people talk about innovation around the table, all think they agree, they leave, and in fact, turns out they meant different things. So I thought in that spirit, let me ask, who in this room, raise your hands, is anti-innovation? Anybody? I love it. There's one guy there, the Luddite who's got the phonograph records and wants his privacy. No, of course not. Innovation is terrific, but what do we mean by it? And so rather than start a conversation, I thought I'd take the chairman's prerogative and put a definition on the table, a simple definition, and start by saying what I think it isn't, though it's often conflated with the idea of invention, gadgets and gizmos, patents, all that cool stuff that Silicon Valley comes up with. Those things might be part of innovation, but I would argue they're the lesser part. Innovation, simply put, I think, is fresh thinking that creates something valuable. And that value can be for shareholders, it can be for society at large, for your company or community. But if you don't create that value, to me, it's just a clever gadget or widget. And so with that, again, perhaps provocative definition, I hope some people will disagree with me in your Twitter postings, fresh thinking that creates value. Let me bring on, without further ado, our distinguished debaters, who's going to be on stage right, Tyler Cowen, arguing in favor of the proposition that innovation is over. Tyler Cowen is a professor at George Mason University and the author of The Great Stagnation, which is perhaps the most controversial and provocative book on economics in the last many number of years. You might say that doesn't say very much, but in fact, he's gotten everyone talking about the nature of innovation. And to my left, on stage left, we have Bhaskar Chakravorti, who is a distinguished Senior Associate Dean of International Business and Finance at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. He also heads the Fletcher's Institute for Business in the Global Context. So give them a round of applause. Now, you should know that The Economist has a long and proud tradition of engaging in civilized discourse, taking on the serious questions of the day in a manner that is respectful, that is highbrow, and these two gentlemen are among the most civil people you'll ever meet. I've asked them to leave all that at the door before they came out. This is a debate, and they're both here to win. And so in that spirit, with the proposal in front of our house, innovation is over. Now let's have the house lights up, because this is, I'll explain the format. I'm going to take a forced poll. I want all of you to vote one way or the other. How many of you agree with the notion before you hear their arguments? And afterward, after you've heard their arguments, we'll take another poll. Again, my old poli-sci professor used to call this the kind of poll where there are no mugwumps. There's no one's allowed to sit on the fence with your mug on one side and your wump on the other. You have to vote one way or the other. How many of you, if you had to vote right now, would say, yes, I agree with the proposition, innovation is over? Hands up. Okay, that Luddite and his friend. Okay, I only see literally two hands. Okay, and since this is a forced poll, I will assume that all of the rest of you disagree with the proposition. So there we go. We'll see how you are persuaded by the arguments here. I must say, Professor Cohen, you have a rough road ahead of you, but we also have a pretty high mountain that you need to defend. So, Professor Chakravorti, let's see. The format, each of them will get opening arguments, rebuttals. I'll come to you for questions from the floor, a few provocative, short and sharp, and preferably witty questions that I'll put to them. We'll get them to come back at you, and then we'll have closing remarks. So it's going to be fast. I'm going to be ruthless on time. I warn both my debaters here. I will cut you off in the spirit of keeping the debate going along. So without further ado, opening arguments. Tyler Cowen.
If you look at the countries which are doing well today, they are playing copy and catch up and recycling. This is not an age of innovation. Let's look at the essentials of human life. How we live, what we dream, what are our narratives, what are our feelings, what are our thoughts. In all of these major areas, most of what is out there is fairly old. Look at forms of government in the world today. They're old forms. Look at the major thinkers. We do not have innovators on a par with Plato or Socrates or Jesus Christ. The major religions, fairly old. The important social movements, women's rights, animal welfare, great stuff, but again, they are not innovative, they are quite old. Simon Reynolds wrote a great book called Retromania about how much today we are recycling the past. Ask yourself a simple question. When was the last time there was a new sexual position? I will give my opponent the chance to demonstrate his answer. And for that, he is allowed to stand up. Let's look at economics. I know we Americans think we're so incredibly innovative. My opponent might try to make this a debate about gadgets. Maybe there are some new gadgets, but look at job growth. No net new job growth over the last now 11 years. Look at median income, not up since 1997. Up only 25% since 1973, an unparalleled slowdown. This is how we are failing at innovation. The numbers are showing this. Take our best available measure, economically speaking, of innovation. It's called total factor productivity. It's at about 1/6 of where it was at its peak in the 1920s and 1930s. In the last 4 decades, the number of startups has gone down every decade, and every decade the size of those startups is smaller. Look at key determinants of innovation in a civilization when there's progress. Transportation speed. It used to go up all the time. Now it's completely flat. We're still flying planes from the late 1960s, and because of congestion, it takes us longer to get places. The age of cheap energy is over. Hydroelectric power and nuclear are going backwards. Energy is more expensive. Look at high school graduation, education, so critically important. That rate peaked in the late 1960s, and we have been going backwards. These are all ways in which we are failing to innovate. We are failing to become more innovative. If you turn on a TV show from the 1960s, 1970s, they don't have smartphones, but most of the stuff looks pretty familiar. You could walk onto the set, you would know how things would work, you would feel quite at home. Antibiotic resistance is a major problem. Medical science is not progressing at the rate that it used to be. Look, I know what this revolution says. It says, is innovation over? You cannot interpret this too literally. We all know some things are going to change. What you have to do is look at the big picture and ask yourself, is innovation what it was cracked up to be today? Do we live in an age of innovation, major innovation, breakthrough innovation, or do we live in an age of what I call copy and catch up and recycling? As I said, the economies which are growing, like China, Brazil, Turkey, they're not major innovators, they're playing catch up, and that's great for them, but it just shows how much this is not an age of innovation. Look at the countries where the major innovations have come from. Western Europe, sorry to say, it's falling apart. America, struggling badly and due for another whack because of Europe. And Japan, aging, full of debt, and they've barely had any growth for almost 25 years now.
30 seconds.
So, is innovation over? The best way to think about this is, are you willing to cast an expressive vote for the notion that when you look closely at the numbers, you look at the entirety of human lives, the dreams, the narratives, feelings, thoughts, how innovative the books are you read, that overall, yes, you can find a small number of areas with some new developments, but the best way to think about it is to cast a vote that innovation is really not the central concept defining our age today. Thank you.
All right, Tyler Cowen, thank you for that tub-thumping, if rather gloomy prognosis. I turn the microphone over to the side opposite.
Mr. Chairman, members of the House, I come here not to bury Professor Cohen, but to praise him. He has really raised the bar on what 2012 needs to deliver. It needs to deliver anti-gravity. It needs to deliver the invisibility cloak. It needs to deliver teleportation. It needs to deliver a new sexual position, which I could have demonstrated. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any volunteers during the networking break. But to take a page from our friends, the occupiers, let's split the world up into the 15% and the 85%. The 15% who live in the so-called advanced economies, and the 85% who live in the so-called emerging or maybe sometimes someday emerging economies. And actually, the advanced economies should really be called the submerging economies. In any case, the emerging economies, let's take one vignette from a small village outside the town of Nasik, which is in the state of Maharashtra in India. And let's take the story of a woman called Shantabai, who, for the first time in her life, owns a fridge, which she doesn't own as yet. She has given an order for a fridge. She has participated in the research for this fridge, and she has asked for a fridge that is a bright red in color. This research was done by the local microfinance institution, and there is a company in India that is now going to be producing this fridge to her specs. This fridge does not run on the power grid, and she can actually afford it. It's going to transform the way she runs her home. It's going to transform the time that she has to take to buy food and to cook food, to prepare food, and to store food. In the meantime, her husband, who's an onion farmer, uses his newly acquired cell phone, and he's beginning to get some apps on the cell phone. One of the apps that he is looking forward to using in the year 2012 is to discover the price of onions in the wholesale market. And he's going to go to the market that delivers the highest price, and it's going to triple his income next year. With that extra income, their daughter is going to buy a tablet computer, which sort of looks like an iPad, except that it's only $35. $35. So we're not talking about copying or mimicking. We're talking about a complete transformation. Yes, sitting in New York, none of this seems a huge deal. But sitting in Nasik, which, by the way, is 85% of where the world is, it is quite transformative. It is totally different. Now, even in the 15%, there is stuff that's going on. I come from Boston, where you can bump into a nanotechnologist or a biotechnologist or a clean technologist or a technologist of some stripe who's promising that they're going to change the world in the next year. And of course, they all fall prey to the Arthur C. Clarke dictum that we overestimate how much we are going to accomplish in the coming year, and severely, severely underestimate what we are going to be able to do over the long term. I think the fallacy that my opponent has fallen a trap to is that he is looking for the next big thing. This is a legacy of an industrial, a post-industrial era, when we were opening frontiers, we were building highways, internal combustion engine, and so on. Now we are heading into a century of constraints. In this constraint, we need to look for tiny chinks of opportunities. We need to look for tiny, small innovations that build on top of the platforms that have been developed in the past century. So the next big thing is actually going to be a whole bunch of small things. And that's the innovation that's coming in 2012 and the years beyond.
Okay, very good. And he came in under time. So the next big thing will be the next small thing, says your opponent. Tyler Cohen, your rebuttal.
I'm glad my opponent has so readily conceded the case. In his search for a volunteer, he had no innovation at hand. But basically, he's telling us it's all about tiny and small. So he's saying innovation isn't over. Innovation is almost over. And once you're debating it on those terms, I think you can really see it's a vote for my side. If you recall what I said at the beginning and the end, I said today's world is a story of copy and catch-up. And my opponent so heartily obliged by giving us a story of copy and catch-up. I love India, I love refrigerators, I love his story, but it's basically a story of copy and catch-up. The idea of microfinance dates from the Middle Ages. The idea of price arbitrage goes back to the ancient Greeks or even further. If you think of the things he left out, I gave you 4 or 5 different numbers measuring just how slow innovation is. Terrible numbers, numbers put out by the US government. These numbers are not disputed. He didn't dispute them. He didn't have better numbers. He didn't have any other numbers. On the number side, he folded. On the innovation side, he folded. Copy and catch-up. The simple question, why have real incomes for the typical household risen so slowly in this country, in Western Europe, in Japan? not really mentioned or discussed. Those are billions of people. Those are the world leaders. Innovations are new things. If we're getting all of these new things, why has debt been going up? Why is real income stagnant? And this is not a partisan issue. You see it on both sides. You look at Occupy Wall Street. You look at the Tea Party. Everyone out there knows something is wrong. And I'd like to point out that even my opponent, the real Bhaskar, he too knows something is wrong. Look at his recent piece in the Harvard Business Review. The first sentence, it's tough to get consumers to adopt innovations, and it's getting harder all the time. Markets, by their very nature, resist new ideas and products. Markets are inimical to innovation. Now, I know there's more stuff he said, but look, you're getting toward innovations over to, tiny and small innovations, so it isn't quite over. Please vote for my side. Here's an Amazon review of his book on The Slow Pace of Change, which is a great book. The reviewer says, I love this book. It shows how true progress is slow. So basically, it's a question, what kind of scraps can we still hold on to? Yes, there's theory. There are some nice things in our lives that have changed. If you look at three key things in a person's life, like what's the cost of health care, what's the cost of a good education, what's the cost of living in a good area where I can send my kids to school, or how long does it take me to get to work? Four key vital areas. We've seen backward motion. And when it came to the dreams, the narratives, the feelings, the thoughts, the great thinkers, the new forms of government, new religions, new social movements, we heard nothing, 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 because basically, again, I will tell you, this is an age of copy, catch-up, and recycling. It's not mostly about innovation.
All right. Well, Bhaskar, we've heard from Bhaskar presenting the counter-argument. What say you?
Well, my respected opponent said I did not give him any numbers. I can give you numbers, but they are kind of depressing. If you see the numbers of income growth in that 85%, they're actually quite staggering. Makes us feel pretty bad about what we are accomplishing here. My respected opponent refers to the stagnant incomes in the United States and the Eurozone, which I already mentioned. They are submerging markets. If you go to the emerging markets, this very farmer that I'm talking about, the onion farmer, his income is going to go up 3 times. 3 times on the basis of one app. On the basis of one app. And that's what I think what constitutes innovation according to the definition that our chairman has given us. Invention that translates into value. Regarding my book and what I wrote about earlier, I was talking about the distinction between Moore's law, which is the pace at which engineers produce technologies, and something that I call demi-Moore's law, which is the pace at which markets can actually absorb those technologies. It's got nothing to do with innovation or the lack thereof. It is simply the slowness of markets in their ability to absorb all this new technology that's being thrown at us. But over time, we do absorb them. Over time, all this good stuff does become part of our system. Today, and in the year 2012, there's actually a third law that I'd like you to consider. And the third law is less is Moore's law, which is the less, the smaller the invention is, the simpler it is, the more convenient it is to use, the cheaper it is, the more stripped down it is, the smaller the environmental footprint. That is going to change the world. That is going to change the lives of not only people in that 85%, but everybody in this 15% as well, because as we are realizing, their lives are tightly intertwined with ours.
Excellent. And you're ahead of time as well. So now we now have some time for you, the audience, to put some tough questions to our debaters. Let me see a show of hands so we know, and let's have the house lights up as well, please, and the microphones coming out. Let's get a couple of good questions. There's a lady here, very brief, quick question. I may take 2 or 3 and then have the panelists respond, so make them short and sweet.
My question is, with the speed of change and right now to our life, what is the definition of innovation yesterday versus today?
Okay, how is the definition of innovation changing? Very good. I see someone in the front row who had their hand here. Okay, you're right there. Yep, there we go. And we'll come back to you, sir, near the pillar.
Question on innovation based on reviving Buckminster Fuller's work and shifting from a world of competition to a world of cooperation, a world that can work for everyone.
Okay. competition versus cooperation. The gentleman there by the pillar had his hand up, and we'll come to this side. Let's see, is there a hand here I saw? We'll come to you next, yeah.
My question kind of relates to the often cited parable that there's nothing new under the sun. I was wondering why exactly you think that this copy, reuse, and recycle nature is not inherently innovation. Why it can't be considered innovation to build on existing technologies and add this new value to people's lives.
Okay. That sounds like a question directed primarily at the pro side, if I understand it. And I promised to come on to this side here. Did I see a hand? Has that been withdrawn? Okay, yes, there is. Okay, go ahead.
How can frugal innovation be applied to developed countries?
To developed countries. Okay, that sounds like, again, a theme picked up by the con side. Okay, why don't we get some quick responses here. As per form, I'll turn to the pro debater. Pick up on those questions as you'd like. Certainly the one that was addressed to you on why is copying not real innovation. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Tyler Cohen, and then I'll come to you.
Take a country like China. What they're doing are manufacturing things more cheaply. There's a small amount of innovation there, but it's mostly driven by a high savings rate and low wage rates and political stability. That's fine. It's great for them. For the most part, it is not innovation. China is not yet on any kind of frontier where new products from China are changing our lives. What's innovation? I take it to be beneficial change coming from new ideas in many areas. Someone raised the issue, are we moving to a society of cooperation? Absolutely not. Even Europe can't seem to cooperate. That's another way in which we're failing to innovate. The topic of energy came up, and clean energy, green energy. On that, it's very clear that we're going backwards in terms of what we're achieving and how much we're polluting the environment. That's a topic which, on the whole, favors my side of the proposition.
Okay. Professor Chakravorti?
Well, I think this whole definition of innovation, starting with the principles of Plato and Socrates, is kind of interesting. These guys are from a part of the world that today is called Greece and seems to be at the center of this part of the world, sort of going into a sinkhole. And I think it's useful for us to reflect on how the paradigms that we have been using in this 15% of the world and applying that to the entire world are just plain wrong. The year 2011 has proven to us that our basic assumptions were wrong. Our basic assumptions that the Arab street could not create their own messy democracies was wrong. Our basic assumption that the messy democracy that we have over here and in Europe, we are proving the messiness of the messy democracies. So we just do need to rethink our definition of innovation. Our definition of innovation should be, I use any idea wherever I can find it, steal it, copy it. Guess what? I'm sort of copying that from a guy called Steve Jobs, who unfortunately isn't here to defend it. But he was one of the best copycats and seemed to have done pretty well as an innovator. So you just basically get your ideas from wherever, as long as you can fill an unmet need and produce extraordinary value. Extraordinary value. That's the definition.
We have another 2 minutes or so. Quick question way in the back row in the middle, and maybe one more. Again, short and sweet. I appreciate that. There's a lady here to my right, all the way in the back. Let's get microphones there.
Quick question for Professor Cowen. If you think innovation is over, when do you think it ended? And second, if you define it by big kind of momentous ideas, what about things that are on the horizon, like quantum computing and the singularity and kind of things that may be on the horizon we haven't reached just yet?
Okay, let's go to the lady waiting there.
Hi, my name is Sharon, and my question is, what do you think innovation is in a modern economy?
What is innovation in a modern economy?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Well, the first question was directed to you, so you get response, and I'll come to you next.
If you look at the numbers, innovation pretty clearly slows down in the Western world and Japan around 1973. I think one reason for that, the immediate cause, is the oil price shock, but a lot of other negative trends come together. We also start over-regulating our society in many ways. Too much litigation, for instance. Big developments in the future with singularity. I'll start believing in the singularity when my browser completely stops crashing and freezing. It's a long, long way off.
All right. A response or a response to the people in the audience?
So the question was, what is innovation in a modern economy?
Yeah.
How would you distinguish a modern economy from the economies of the past, if I may ask the question? I just want to make sure I'm addressing the right question.
Very briefly.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, what I'm saying is just our economy is now, we identify as first world versus developing world.
Okay, so the developed economy, OECD, is what I'm hearing.
Well, the developed world, as I mentioned, is actually going the other direction. It's going into a submerging phase. So we do need to get this part of the world back on its feet and to start showing growth again. Now, we do have a whole bunch of underlying technologies that are being developed on the nano front, on the bio front, on the clean front. And over time, we are going to see the fruits of that labor. More immediately, there are innovations that are being developed in the emerging markets which are going to come back to the developed world. So we're going to see portable medical devices that are already being talked about by none less than the CEO of General Electric. We're going to see chocolate bars, which were invented in India to prevent chocolate from melting. They put melted chocolate in the core and a crisp pastry on the outside. That product was invented in India, and now it's going to find its way back to the United States and England.
I'm going to stop you there on that very delicious note. Yeah. And my waistline looks forward to this non-caloric, non-melting chocolate as well. When you come up with that, that's when I'll know frugal engineering has arrived. Okay, now it is now time. Thank you for your contributions. I thought that lightning round worked really well. Closing remarks from the opening side, from the pro side, and we'll go to the side opposite. 1 minute, so make it short and sweet.
If we're so innovative, why is everyone unhappy? No answer given. Most of my points, most of my numbers, no answer given. My opponent, his argument culminates in the example of a non-melting chocolate bar. What we heard was a lot of apology, a lot for why we're not doing better, a lot of talk of slow, a lot of talk of tiny and small. We keep on coming back to emerging markets, which is exactly my theme of copy and catch up. Some of those countries are doing great. We should be very happy about that. But you look at the frontier in our lives, whether the area is religion or forms of government or philosophies or brilliant new thinkers like Plato or Moses or Jesus Christ or economic growth, and you have to ask again, if we're so fundamentally innovative, where are the big breakthroughs? Why is all the talk about chocolate bars and refrigerators in India? And what I see looking at the numbers, the examples, the concepts, that you should vote for my side of the debate. Thank you all.
Very good. Tyler Cowen, thank you. To you, Professor Chakravorti.
Well, I would still go back to the extreme copycat, Steve Jobs. His final words were, "Oh, wow." And I wonder, what did he see on the other side? Did he see another whatever? Or did he see another 10,000 apps? What's the bigger innovation? My argument is that the bigger innovation are those tiny things that you build on top of some big thing that has been done already. That big thing that has been done already could be the iPad, it could be the wireless network, or it could be all the philosophy of Jesus Christ, Plato, and Socrates put together.
Very good. Okay. Now the moment of truth has arrived. You've heard the arguments. We've seen them go at each other. Hammer and tong, as they say. Let me have another vote. Again, another one of the forced votes. How many of you vote with the proposition, innovation is over? Raise your hands. High. My goodness. Okay, well, I think I can already say by a factor of perhaps 5,000%, the initial showing of the pro side has won this debate. Congratulations to Tyler Cowen, but also congratulations and thank you to Professor Chakravorti. Give them both a nice round of applause. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. I'm going to turn the microphone over to our chairman of our event, Daniel Franklin. Again, thanks to our wonderful debaters.